If you're a parent, teacher, or school leader, and you're sick and tired of the frustration, anger, and unfair treatment of children at high risk in our public schools, then perhaps it's time for all of us to do something about it. In this podcast, Dr. Almitra Berry brings you tips, tools, strategies, and tactics to build successful solutions while touching, moving, and inspiring all of us to transform our schools so that every child thrives. Here's your host, Dr. Berry.
Welcome back, Equity Warriors. Thanks for tuning in today to the 3E podcast. As you can see, or maybe you can't if you're audio only, but I do have a guest today. She is a first-generation Cuban American who served on the Hillsborough County School Board in Florida for 14 years before her successful run for the Florida House of Representatives back in 2018. There, she actively supports public education and prison reform, emphasizing the enduring value of education. It is my absolute honor to welcome Florida State Representative Susan Lopez-Valdés. Welcome to the show, my fellow equity warrior.
Well, thank you, Dr. Berry, for having me on your podcast today and having these courageous conversations that we need to dare to have.
That is wonderful. I'm glad when you said, let's have a courageous conversation. I was like, yes, no political fluff here. We're going to get down to the real nitty gritty. But I want my listeners to get to know a little bit about you. So I want you to start with your story. You are a first generation Cuban American. You were born in New York, moved to Florida at age 8. How did you become such an advocate for public education?
Wow, Dr. Berry, that's a great question because, oftentimes from a little girl, my parents being immigrants and really not understanding the language very much, because although in Cuba you were taught English, but you were taught the old English. Remember when we were kids, see Jane run, run, Jane run.
Yeah, old Dick and Jane. Hey, I was in those books too in elementary school. So
when you think about it, it's not the street talk of everyday American talk. So it was very challenging for them. And as a little girl, because I carried both languages at the same time. At school, I had to speak English and I was, fluent in English. And at home, I knew I had to talk Spanish. So I grew up being biliterate, literally. And I found myself at a very young age having to translate for my mom and my dad. My dad, not so much, because really and truly, he passed away when I was 10 years old after we moved to Florida when I was a little girl. So, but it was mainly more so my mom. But even at a young age, at 6 or 7, I had to describe what a word meant, if you will. So it was tough. So I experienced firsthand some of those challenges. So when you were taught those family values, of course, the importance of an education, the importance of really infusing your culture within the culture, if you will, so you don't lose your essence of who you are. And that was very important. So fast forward when we moved to Miami back in 1972, that's we lived in Miami, and imagine Miami in 1972 is not what it is today.
No, I've been watching Griselda on Netflix.
Let me tell you, Dr. Berry, no joke, it was a farm with lights. Yeah. So much so that I used to walk to school, and I lived, for those that might be listening that know a little bit about Hialeah, Palm Avenue and 9th Street is like the center of Hialeah, right? And that's right where the corner that I used to live off of. And on Palm Avenue, on my way to school, I hear this thing go, trakata, trakata, trakata. I'm like, what is that? It was a bull that had left the matadero. And yes, and then they finally shot the bull and knocked the bull out in a little hotel space on the sidewalk of which you normally would walk to go to school. But luckily that day, God works in mysterious ways. I had to go and buy a pencil from the little convenience store in the corner. So I wasn't walking in that side of the sidewalk. So, but I did see this bull. I looked at Daddy later on when I go for, Daddy, where'd you bring me? This is really a jungle. And coming from the Bronx, you just had entertainment just by watching. It was a different kind of barrio, of hood, if you will.
Yeah.
So, oh my gosh. So, anyways, when Daddy passed away, Mom had family in Tampa, so that was her support, right? So we were closer to my grand uncle, and we moved to Tampa, and ever since then we've been in Tampa. So my journey, throughout, I am the youngest of four, and for those that are listening and paying attention to this, being a first generation American born of Cuban immigrants was tough for me, because in my family dynamic, although we were four siblings, I did not have the opportunity to meet my sisters until 1979, because the regime got us separated. So my two eldest sisters remained in Cuba, while my brother, which would have been the youngest, was over here with Mom and Dad. And back in the day, relations were normal. So they would spend the summers in Cuba with my grandparents, and then, of course, come back this way. So the regime separated us. And it was tough because I didn't grow up with my siblings. I really grew up almost like a single child, because my brother, being 15 years older than me, he was my big brother, right? He was already off, and he was in Vietnam, a veteran in Vietnam. And, so I remember that time as well, when the only way that Mom could know about my brother was through a priest that would come visit us in the project building, which are better known today as condominiums, by the way. They would come knocking on the door, and when Mommy would see through the peephole that it was the priest, automatically she teared up, because she did not know what was going to come out of that guy's mouth, out of the priest's mouth. So it was, those experiences helped me shape who I am and how I think about people and community. And it's that's a little bit more intimate about me. I am married for 41 years. I have 3 wonderful children and 5 great grandchildren, which, oh my gosh, if you don't have grandbabies yet, you think you love your kids. Just wait.
Yeah. I have one, and I think we're done with grandkids. Yeah.
But it's a wonderful feeling, But definitely, that's a little bit about myself, and I decided to the way I winded up running for school board was through. Most people don't know this, but I was a practice administrator for a healthcare office, and what I call my last mission was working with the working poor. And I do not like to use this word, because by the grace of God, I could be indigent in no time. But that was the name of the program, the Indigent Healthcare Program. And a lot of what I found there were folks with chronic diseases, such as diabetes, coronary pulmonary artery disease, or cancer, or even heart issues. And these diseases, they affect anyone at any age. And this young man came and said, and I don't know where he is today, but he came by and says, can I talk to you, Susan? You're so easy to talk to. And I said, sure. And he was going down a rabbit hole. I says, wait a minute, I'm not a mental health counselor, so I can't go there. And he was just saying, I wish I could have done things differently. I'm about to lose my wife and my children. And I love them tremendously. And I'm sick, and, all those woes. And I said, well, wait a minute. I said, if you could just press that reset button and start all over again, what would you do? He says, oh man, I'd be an electrician. I'm like, all right, come back tomorrow, bring me your taxes. He goes, what are we going to do? I says, we're going to apply for the FAFSA. You're going to go to school. Awesome. Me at the age of 35, go back to school? I says, yeah, sure, why not? You ain't got nothing else to do. You're sick. You don't have a job, And sure enough, he went. I got him approved. I got him a seat at the table. He didn't have transportation. I asked the social worker to help me out with a bus pass for him. And Dr. Berry, this gentleman was I didn't see him throughout his schooling, but I says, let me check to see if he's coming in for his appointments because he's a diabetic, right?
Yeah.
My goodness, he made it so that he would come early in the morning, wouldn't even say hello. He would just
Mhm.
like, because he was on a specific schedule, so he had to catch that bus.
Yeah.
14 months later, he comes back. Says, I don't know why you did this for me, but look, here's my license. And I said, I did that for you and encourage you to do it because you shared with me how much you loved your wife, how much you loved your daughters, and how much you wanted to change the trajectory. And through an education, you can do that. And he says, well, why don't you help knucklehead kids like me? You know? And this is a guy in his 30s, right? It was hilarious. And he says, so why don't you be superintendent? I says, well, no, you got to be appointed for that. He goes, well, sit on that board or whatever. Okay, so hence I ran for the board, got elected in 2004, and that's when the journey began. And the journey, the journey is still existing. I cannot emphasize enough how important the conversations around equity and what it truly means and what it really looks like. Because I don't care, you could be the most genius kid. There's equity there for you too, because if you're that smart, we need to challenge you even more so. So that's what, in my opinion, we need to do. It's not just so much for the lowest performing kids or the socioeconomic kids. Equity means across the spectrum. If you have a really good, bright child, let's challenge that child and give them the extra that they need in order to thrive even more so, and afford those opportunities for the other kids to flourish and prosper as well. So this conversation is very timely, especially in a time in which our country is in a really funky state. I mean,
Yeah, this state that we're in,
and the state of Florida, where I'm in,
that you're in,
mercy.
Yeah. So we have the state of public education, we have the state of public education in the state of Florida. So, my listeners know I talk about Florida all the time, and it's not because I'm trying to pick a state to pick on. It's just that every time I open my ed briefs that are up there and look at the news, across the nation, there's not a day that goes by that I don't see Florida or Texas, sometimes both and sometimes multiple articles about something that's being done in that state or in those school systems that is everything that equity is not, everything that would diminish opportunities for people like the man that you helped, what he grew up to be, to help them become whatever it is that they want to become. So let's talk about Florida. There's so much going on. And legislation. I think the legislation, your session just closed.
We're in the middle of session.
You're in the middle of session.
But it feels like day 98. We a little bit about Florida. We are considered a part-time legislature.
Okay.
So we meet 6 weeks in committees, right?
Mm-hmm.
Then after committees, we have 60 days of session.
Okay.
So in those 60 days, we create laws. I don't know about y'all, but the way I check to see if my spaghetti is ready, I take a little piece and I throw it on the wall. It sticks.
Throw it on the wall and see what sticks.
So, and that's how I feel sometimes that we are creating these rules, these policies, because we just know that we have 60 days to make some sort of impact and say we did something. I'm from the old school of saying, listen, let's be thoughtful about what we're doing, so that then when we do apply laws, that they are meaningful, it's a meaningful and thoughtful policy that's going to help society, that's going to help children. And sometimes, I'm voting on things that I really don't know what the topic is, right? And I have to really quickly get schooled by experts, so that then at least I feel confident of what I'm voting on is acceptable, right? Yeah. So I give you that frame so that the listeners really understand, because we have 50 states, And
Right.
every state does their legislations differently. So
Yeah.
Florida is unique in that way that we have 6 committee weeks. And by the way, sometimes in committee weeks, all we're hearing are presentations. We're
Yeah.
not even talking about bills, right? We're not talking about legislation ideas. We're talking about this is what we may be seeing about
Yeah.
and what a piece of legislation might be created around that topic. So you get a
So,
sense about what leadership is wanting to talk about.
yeah, yeah. And that gives them the opportunity to spend a lot of time out of session figuring out, I'll just say the way I feel, what can they do to further damage marginalized children? What else can we do to foster our narrative about who deserves an education and what type of education they deserve and what they should be learning? So I want to ask you, is there anything going on that in the state of Florida, I'm going to frame the question this way, that will actually address the disparities for marginalized learners, culturally diverse, linguistically diverse, economically challenged, or kids who maybe are non-gender conforming, or uncertain about who they are. All of those groups that they tend to demean, to blast, and seem to do nothing but try and figure out how other ways to oppress them. Hey there, Equity Warriors. I want to take a quick moment to share something exciting with you. You know how passionate I am about equity in education, right? Well, I've created a special space, a safe space, where we can dive even deeper into these crucial topics. It's our Patreon channel, and I'd love for you to join me there. Here's why it's so awesome. As a Patreon subscriber, you'll get access to exclusive content that I will not share anywhere else. I'm talking additional insights, workshops like you would get in regular professional learning sessions, resources that can really amplify your impact in education. But it's more than just extra content. By subscribing, you are directly supporting our mission. You're helping to create more valuable discussions and resources that you've come to love. You're part of the change we're making in educational systems. And let me tell you, our Patreon community, it is something special. It's a place where passionate educators and advocates can come together, share ideas, and drive real change. So if you're ready to take your commitment to educational equity to the next level, I'd be thrilled to have you join me. Just head over to patreon.com/3E podcast. That's patreon.com/3E podcast. Remember, your support means the world to me, and it helps me continue this important work. Together, we can create the educational system all our students deserve. Thanks for considering, and now let's get back to the episode.
That's a question that's really heartbreaking for me, because in the state of Florida, we have seen laws after laws that are really targeting these children, and it's heartbreaking. I have voted no on all those policies, but I also want you all to know more or less the makeup of this legislature. We are 120 representatives, of which 85,
let me guess, are white men
and white
and
women.
women.
And the rest are Democrats. So out of the 120, so that right there is a disparate, right
Yeah,
there.
yeah. And no way reflective of the demographic of Florida as a whole.
Absolutely not.
Yeah.
Absolutely not. On the Democratic side of the House, there are 2 Hispanics. 2.
That is
I'm one
unbelievable. Unbelievable.
So on the Republican side, there are more Hispanics out of South Florida, right? Miami-Dade area. In the Senate side, there's 40 senators, of which 28 are Republican and 12 are Democrats. So we really are, we can almost be irrelevant
Yeah.
if you will. If we come up here, we're like that shoe gnat,
Yeah.
because they have the numbers to do whatever it is that they want to do.
But we need you to keep being that gnat, because even if they do what they want to do, somebody has got to keep telling them it's wrong and getting that narrative out, that what you're doing harms children and ultimately the state as a whole.
Absolutely. So that's what I was going to describe it as. We become that consciousness. And I really try to be kind, because I believe that I don't want more wrinkles. So you have to be kind, because think about it. When you get angry and you frown, they do become upside down frowns.
Yeah.
So you know what? No, we're going to treat folks with kindness, because at the end of the day, it's the example that we want to give our children, that you can resolve situations by having conversations and not going the violent way, right?
Yeah.
So I know that I have children watching me. I know that I have high school kids and college kids that follow me and watch me, because during that tenure of my school board member career, I had a whole cohort of students that I came in 2004 with, and I left with them, right?
Yeah.
So those kids are my kids. They're all my kids. I don't, there's not one child that I don't think about, that if they have a situation, we have to help them through it. And that's one of the things that in state legislature, it's very bureaucratic with how you can easily help a family, right?
Yeah.
Because it's more of a local issue. So the advocacy is different. But I shared with you the dynamics of what the legislature is made up, so that then folks can understand, number one, the importance of voting. Number two, the importance of knowing who you're going to vote for and what they stand for.
Yes.
In this education space, you know that we have a lot of school choice. And quite frankly, Dr. Berry, you know that I love our public schools. I am a public school kid. And I was also in private school for a little bit, so I know both worlds. And I got to tell you that sometimes in our public school systems, we're still cookie cutting our education to kids.
Tell me about it.
And that's where this school choice movement has come up above from, because we all know that we're all individuals. I wish that every child could have an IEP.
Yeah.
Because every child has their own learning style. You know, it's like, okay, we're going to buy the same dress. The dress is going to look different on you than it is going to be looking different on me. Yet it's the same dress.
Yeah, but it's the same dress. You have equality. Yeah, and equality is, I always remind folks, equality is not equity. Giving us the same thing does not mean you meet our needs. Yeah. Yeah. So
I think that sometimes our public school systems, they have to open up their eyes that times are changing.
Yeah.
And kids are learning differently. The moment you put a kid with one of these in their hands, you now have opened the world to them. And we must be able to personalize the educational experience. We must be able to be a little bit flexible, because it's not like when we were in school. I mean, the challenges that our kids have today are not the same challenges we had. As a matter of fact,
you and I never had to worry about somebody shooting up our school.
No, ever.
No.
Ever. We didn't have some of the things that we did as kids that were jokes are today felonies, you know?
Yeah.
So there goes that school to prison pipeline, of which I did discover in the state.
Yeah.
I saw it.
Yeah, it's there. It's real. I don't know if I shared with you. I probably didn't, because we were chatting before. I have a book that's coming out this fall on equitable instructional practices for culturally and linguistically diverse and marginalized, because I've included the issues with gender and gender nonconformity and how we're treating those children as well, marginalized learners in our schools. And one of the things that I knew from my research years ago, went back and validated, it's still there, is a thing called this sorting process, where in kindergarten, our own implicit biases as teachers, because, I was a teacher, educator. I prefer to use the term educator because my job was to move children, not fill them up with the information I wanted them to have. But what happens in kindergarten is kindergarten and preschool teachers' implicit biases about what children of color or children who are gender nonconforming should do or could do influences how they provide instruction to them. And so those children are already deemed as a troublemaker, hard to teach, doesn't want to sit still. And these labels follow that child. We start creating that pipeline to prison in kindergarten. And as long as we have states that are not, recognizing it or that are doing things to fuel it, when you take a solid curriculum away, when you take books, I'm on a book burn or book ban diatribe. When you start banning books and not allowing children in school to read first-person resources, primary source documents about the true history of what happened in their backyard, right? You are creating that pipeline.
Think about what happens in other types of regimes.
Mm. Yeah, and that's what it is. Regime is the right word to use there.
Yes. Well, for the last, think about it. The state of Florida has been, all the problems that exist in the state of Florida, really the Republicans own it because they've been in control for so many years. Yeah. More than 2 decades. Yeah. So all of the problems that we're seeing in the state of Florida with the lack of home ownership insurances, the rents going skyrocketed. There's so many things that we as a state could be really addressing more to help our Floridians live a decent life. It's not a part of the discussion. On the contrary, we are talking about sending our Florida National Guard and State Guard to Texas. Really.
Yeah, because we really need them over here, right?
Exactly. We're talking about, let's take DEI out of schools, and you can't talk about it because you're making white people feel bad. Listen, I don't care if you're white, black, Hispanic, Asian. If you make somebody feel bad, you make somebody feel bad.
Well, a lot of I think about that statement all the time. It's like you're causing children to feel anguish or whatever. The kids aren't feeling any anguish. Mm-hmm. It's the adults that have racism in their hearts that feel anguish, or perhaps, I say to clarify, they may feel guilt because they're doing these type of things, right? Or they believe in those types of things, but it's not bothering our children. Our children are curious and they seek to understand everything to make their own decisions. And as educators, we should be teaching them how to think, not teaching them what to believe. And this whole idea about that DEI is indoctrination. Well, what you're doing is indoctrinating children in your belief system instead of letting them learn about everything and discover what it is that they believe in.
Sociology is being taken away from in our college campuses as a requirement.
How do you do that?
You can't make this stuff up.
No.
I just think that we need to, elections matter. That's all I have to say.
Yeah. I say at the end of every show, vote like your life depended on it, because it does. And more than just voting for president, you've got to vote for school board. Yes. You've got to vote for mayor, city council. You absolutely have to vote for your state legislature, because that's who's making the educational decisions that come into policy in your school district that become what your kids are learning or not learning.
Or not. And think about it, Dr. Berry, that, your city council and your county commissioners, they hire your chief of police.
Yep. Yeah. Your school board hires your superintendent.
So it matters. It matters. And I think that unfortunately, because of the way that the country is, I mean, I don't recognize my colleagues on the other side anymore, because I remember we could have really good, and I still have those relationships here, you know, in the state legislature, because that's very important, is to build those relationships, even if you're in the super minority. You still have the ability to make policy changes, of which I have. And so building those relationships, and I don't want to paint everyone with the same brush, but you know, you have that small percentage, that small sector that has the loudest voices, that are really, they're the super minority, and they're getting a lot of attention. And that particular group, the MAGAs, or, you know,
the bullies,
you know, is old school. I bully, I'll handle my bully. Right.
Yeah.
You know, and unfortunately today, kids can't handle the bully because they'll get in trouble for defending themselves as well.
Right.
You know, so we have to untie some of these hands. We have to have these conversations, because we want to leave our kids in a much better place than we were. And I think that there has been, you know, these isms have been around forever.
Yeah.
And it's how we as adults handle and want to choose how to do those isms. I accept people for who they are, so long as they accept me for who I am, right? And understand that it's okay to disagree agreeably, and we can move on. And that's that yin and yang.
Yeah.
That makes.
But you know what? When you say that, when we were young, growing up in school, we're close to the same age, I think.
Yes.
We were taught to engage in that debate, right? To talk things through. And what it seems like we have now is like, no, this is my idea. This is what we believe. This is what's going to happen. We're not going to debate it, because right now, you know, in the case of Florida, right now, I have the power, and I'm going to keep that power, and I'm going to get what I want. And I don't care what you think. That idea of having an informed and I want to say, it's not happening. And then we have, so what I want to do is, you know, I would like to be more social commentary aligned, and let's give some people some solutions. We have parents and community stakeholders, members of the community, that could be doing more to influence educational policy for the children we're talking about, the ones that are being marginalized in Florida. What would you say to them? What do they need to do?
They need to continue the conversation. Do not give up. What they need to do is come with facts. Come with actual, you know, fact check yourself, right?
Yeah.
And call it out, right? But continue the fight, because it's super important that these voices are heard. And it's a challenge, because you could very easily give up. There's sometimes, for instance, yesterday on the floor of the House, we passed a piece of legislation, HB 49, which takes away all of the protections for our kids that are 16 and 17-year-old children. Because I don't care. A 17-year-old
they're still children.
Is still a child.
Yeah.
That they can work just like an adult can work, with the exception from, I think it's 11 o'clock at night to 6 in the morning. During that time, they can't work, but they could work at 6 a.m.
So we're talking about 16-year-olds. My grandson is 16. So he's a high school sophomore. I cannot imagine that he would get up at 5 a.m. I know it happens, and it happens more and more in marginalized communities, and particularly here in Texas along the southern border, where we have, some
The
kids who are
workers.
migrant children even coming over to the U.S. because they're American citizens, but their families have been deported, coming over, going to school, coming over at 5 o'clock in the morning, working a job, going to school, working after school, and then going back across the border. These are kids that have an 18-hour work school day, and it should be criminal that children have to do this. So I know that it's happening, but I think about my grandson because he's my living example of what a 16-year-old is in this country right now.
Right.
And the idea of him working until 11 o'clock at night and getting up and being in class at 7 o'clock in the morning is unconscionable. It should not be happening.
He's not going to do well academically.
No. When I taught, I had 11th grade U.S. history one year. Best assignment, I always say it was the best assignment I ever had because I had one prep. I had one class to teach 5 times, the same lesson plan 5 times a day. It was a little tough the first period, but by the time I got to that last period of the day, it's like it flew by. It was easy. But my first class started at 7:05 a.m. I still remember that. 7:05 a.m. it was zero period is what they called it. And my high school juniors in zero period were walking in, eating espresso beans and drinking coffee. And this was at that time, it was an affluent high school, right? These were white upper middle class kids for the most part who could not function at 7 a.m. And it's not because they were working until 11 o'clock at night. So what we're asking these children to do, 11 o'clock at night, I'm asleep, is to do, to work hours that we don't want to work. And
it's jobs. Well, also, unfortunately, as you know, here in Florida, or maybe not, but last session, Senate Bill 1718 was signed into law, which is the most anti-Hispanic immigration law. That if you come into the state and for some reason you wind up getting pulled over or whatever, and you have undocumented people in your car, or let's say you're working from Georgia in the farms in Georgia and you're coming into your next assignment here in the state of Florida, you could be arrested and charged as a felon, as a human trafficker. And God forbid if there's a child in there, because then now that family, and it could be your son, it could be your nephew, it could be you could be Kim.
Yeah.
And it doesn't matter. You can be charged as a human trafficker. And those penalties for human trafficking here in the state of Florida is mandatory prison, and if it's a child, Lord have mercy, 15 years. And this, you could actually break up a family, right? So it's extremely egregious, so much so that one of the farmers, state representative from South Florida, he actually had a town hall meeting, and you can look it up on YouTube. His name is Rick Roth, and he actually told the migrants, we did this to scare you.
Yeah.
But please don't go. We need workers, so and
I honestly think no. And I think that things like that won't change until nobody's crops get picked.
Correct.
Until nobody's pool gets clean, until their houses aren't being built because of the way that we're treating the people who carry the economy and historically, we talk about what they don't want to teach, like the fact that America was built on the bodies of enslaved people because the people that came over voluntarily couldn't do the work.
The White House
is
a great example.
Right. Designed and built by Black people, by slaves. And I know the politically correct term is to say enslaved persons. I'm sorry, I'm from those people. And nobody was considering us as persons at the time. Thank you for the acknowledgement now. But in a historical sense, they were chattel. And it's not too far distant from what we are doing when we have legislation like that criminalizes that behavior, right, of being as a family unit and trying to find work. All you're doing is creating people to go to prison to become slaves. And I'm going to use that term because you're going to use prison workers to do labor for next to nothing so that those who own businesses can take advantage of that near free labor to increase their profits.
So, it's our policies have had tremendous impact on our communities, on our marginalized communities. I mean, even so much so that, um, it's, I guess it's too woke, but I'm woke.
Well, I've got you. Now that you bring that word up, because your governor seems to be really fond of anti-woke, as does mine here in Texas, anti-woke policies. And I always challenge people, tell me what woke is. And they can't.
Of course not. I mean,
But we say, like so many things, that it's been culturally appropriated actually from Black folks, because there was a period of time where we could not stay in hotels and motels when we traveled. So we had the Green Book, right, to tell us where we could stay. And what our families would tell them is to stay woke, keep your head on a swivel. That's where it came from, because you didn't know who was following you, whether or not you'd be pulled out of your car and lynched just for being in the wrong town after the sun went down. That's what that was. But they have appropriated it and bastardized it and tried to turn it into something that it is not.
Exactly. So here we are. Some of our policies, I just tell people, stay awake.
Yeah.
Stay awake. Be alert of what's happening, because you see what happens is that a lot of people don't know what state legislators do.
No.
Because what they're doing, they're caught up in their own world. And I get it, because you're working two jobs. All I know is I got to keep a roof over my head. I got to keep food on the table, and I got to take care of my kids, my family. So the politicians, that's where politicians get a bad rap, because we're not that engaged. And I've told my constituents and my family and friends, if you ever see me change who I am, baby, please ask me. You say, what's wrong with you, Susan? Keep holding me accountable. Because sometimes we get caught in the title or in the thing. I'm Susan Valdes.
All right. Representative Susan Valdes.
And what I do is represent, right? So that's where, for me, it's not about a title. For me, it's not about none of that stuff. For me, it's about bringing awareness and trying to change parts of these individuals that really do not understand. I work with a lot of millionaires. I'm not one of them.
Mm-hmm.
But, when you have that really disparate, that my kid don't need to work, right?
Yeah.
So, but then again,
when they have privilege, right? Those privileged people.
Privileged people, because you have the capacity to shelter your children and not put them in harm's way, and or anyhow, it's just so complicated, but it really isn't, because as long as we think that all of our kids have the capacity of doing great things and given the opportunities with the right supports, what a great place this would really be.
Stay on that. I wanted to talk to you about teacher training, teacher professional development in the state of Florida. I want you to tell us where you all are. I know that almost said Mississippi, not Mississippi, Massachusetts, New York, and Maryland have legislation that's just being enacted, new legislation coming in this year, being enacted this year, that is mandating that the teacher colleges in their state teach the science of reading and teach scientific strategy. So they're moving to make sure that universities are preparing teachers and putting a lot of money behind it, as well as making sure that their schools are using scientific approaches to instruction. So I want to know where's Florida on that? Anything happening with teacher training as a strategy to improve outcomes for our marginalized learners?
That's a very good question. In the state of Florida, we have a huge teacher shortage in the state of Florida.
Gee, I wonder why.
Right? I mean, you can't, all of these things that teachers have to, I mean, you can't even put a pride flag in your room.
I was going to say, I can say it. You can't say gay, right?
I can say it all day long.
You can't teach true Black history. I can say gay all day long.
You just can't, Yes, you can't. So, um, having said that, now we're trying to figure out how we can um, help more teachers receive their certification
Yeah.
and find alternative ways of being to certified teachers so that then we can fill those gaps. So as far as the professional development and the training, that's really, I have to look a little bit more into that part of statute to understand a little bit more if we're doing anything new. But to the best of my knowledge, we're not doing anything per se to help the universities ramp up their colleges of ed,
Yeah.
if that
Yeah.
makes sense, because
Yeah.
we're trying to encourage folks that didn't go to the College of Ed and are looking for a different career, let's say an engineer or some help you become a teacher, right? So that
Yeah.
then we
Yeah.
can
Those alternative paths of
those alternative
certification,
paths.
right?
Yes.
To get people
So
out of, or even those close to retirement, maybe thinking about doing something else to come
correct,
over and teach.
and do that. So
Yeah.
I think that, listen, I would probably get fired as a teacher
I know I would.
because because first of all, I have to build that relationship with that kiddo.
Yeah.
I have to be able to let that kiddo know, baby, I got you, and I
Yeah.
want the best for you. And if you work with me, I'll work with you, and we're gonna have a great time. So I would have to first set up my classroom in a sense where it's gonna be a fun place to be, that they want to come to see Ms. Lopez-Valdés, and they don't want to leave my classroom. That's the
Yeah.
kind of teacher I would want to be. But to get there, you gotta build those relationships, and you can't build those relationships while you have to make sure that on day 2 you're teaching the quadratic equation. And
Or if you can't acknowledge the fact that the child has 2 moms or 2 dads,
two dads,
or if you can't
know,
acknowledge the fact that the child does not want to be called or recognized by the gender they were assigned at birth, right? These
So
type of things.
exactly. And anyhow, so I know that I would not meet the standards on a timely basis because we'll catch it up, but I need to build that relationship with
Yeah.
you. You have to be able to know that as a kid you can trust me.
Yeah.
So much so that I do that up here in Tallahassee. All the interns, they always congregate here and we have real conversations, and they
Yeah.
appreciate those. By the way, something that we didn't talk about that I want to share with you
Go for it.
is that I have 7 bill slots that I'm able to present pieces of legislation. And I save one of those bill slots for our high school students back home.
Oh, wow.
And I have them, I call it ought to be a law. So what I know that I'm shaping their world. So kids, tell me what it is that you feel important. And I don't know what it is that they're going to present to me. I go cold turkey to the meeting, and I go back to my school board chairman seat, and I sit there, and we have this conversation with the kids, and they'll present their bills, ideas to me, and then I choose one. This past meeting we had, I encouraged the school board members to come because I wanted them to understand that they could potentially do this in their own district, as to maybe call it ought to be a
Policy.
right? And have the kids engaged. So we had 3 different schools present, of which 2 of those schools I assigned to the school board and said, this is your wheelhouse. Y'all need to figure this one out for the kids. And then I carried one of their bills. And the bill that I'm carrying for them, this is how thoughtful that I want to share. I want to end this podcast because we talked about a lot of ugly stuff that are real, that we have to have those courageous conversations and not be shallow about them, but really talk to them about the real issues and have that real talk. And by the same token, I want to end with some hope. We have some fabulous children that are in our school districts. And these kids, their idea was, and the way they presented it was so cute. It says, eating out is an American pastime. And we know that if you have an allergy, your pastime may not be able to be the same.
Right.
Because you can lose your life.
Yeah.
So their idea was to ensure that managers in the restaurant business And anyone that touches food has a specific training on how to detect allergens in people and how to react to those. And by the same token, every restaurant needs to have a poster reminding them about the allergens. So these are the thoughts of 16 and 15-year-olds about how to help some of their friends that have allergies. We had another one that came into law, and this one was really, really special. These were kids that had friends who were in the foster system. And they were kids that were of means, that had a little bit more middle-class kids.
Yeah.
And they thought that it was unfair that these children didn't even know what their rights and responsibilities were as being a child of the state of Florida. So many of the kids didn't know that they had their college paid for. Many of the kids didn't know what really neglect, abuse really meant. So their idea was to create a Bill of Rights for these children. And it got signed into law. So I have hope that although these conversations have been going on for years, we stand on the shoulders, Dr. Berry, on so many that have fought these battles before us. We just can't be complacent. We have to be smart. We have to be intentional with how we talk about this and help bring awareness and hopefully change those hearts, because there is still hope in our children.
Absolutely.
It's not time to rope.
No. I always sign off with a paraphrase of, I say, the great Dr. Angela Davis. And she said, I am no longer accepting the things I cannot change. I am changing the things I cannot accept. So I always ask my guests, what is the one thing you cannot accept? And then what can listeners do to support a change to that effect? So you've got it already. I can see it on your face.
Hypocrisy. Say what you mean what you say. And if you learned something and was educated that maybe changed your mind, give credit to hey, I spoke to Dr. Berry. And guess what? In our conversation, I figured out that maybe we need to pay a little bit more attention to equity, X, whatever. And just admit it. Don't be a hypocrite, because those hypocrisies is what gets things so twisted. And those are the things that we can't change. So one of the things that I believe is sometimes you can't dance around the truth. You can't dance around what's really in your face. We got to call it is what it is in a kind and a respectful manner. Because at the end of the day, that's how we are going to set the tone as leaders elected by our constituents, or leaders within your communities, that community looks at you as, wow, we have hope in Dr. Berry because she's going to help us get the school lunch fixed, whatever the thing might be, and hypocrisy is something that we can't change, because you can't change other people. So it's up to us not to be hypocrites and to say, if we're going to say we're going to do X, then do X and get it done. Don't say that you don't do this, but behind closed doors, yes, you do. Because, a great example is an organization that was grown right out of here in Florida.
Yeah. Moms for Liberty.
Moms for that. Yeah, that's the one that goes around talking about books and things of that nature. Yet, okay. All right now. So that's the one thing that that hypocrisy has got to stop.
It does. All right. Thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, my guest today has been Representative Susan Lopez-Valdés. Her full bio and contact information for those of you who live in Florida, or maybe you are an elected official from somewhere else who just wants to find out more about her ought to be a law or ought to be a policy initiative, you'll be able to contact her office. I'm going to say Susan, Representative Valdés. Thank you for joining me. It is always a pleasure to speak with you. And A pleasure to have a voice who is doing good things in the state of Florida on the show. Equity warriors out there, Representative Lopez-Valdés says an education can never be erased. So please, let's continue to work to make sure that every child gets the education that they deserve. Get involved, stay involved. You know it, vote like your life depended on it, and make sure you're voting in those local and state elections. Run for school board. At least attend a school board meeting. Follow me across my channels. Smash that like button, share, subscribe, and continue to join me again next week. Send me your questions, topics, and requests to info@askdrberry.com, and I will answer your questions and bring you experts to help address those topics. As always, don't worry about the things you cannot change. Change the things you can no longer accept. And I'll see you next time.
That's it for today's episode of the 3E Podcast. Head over to iTunes and subscribe to the show. One lucky listener every single week that posts a review on iTunes will win a chance in a grand prize drawing to win a $25,000 value private VIP day with Dr. Berry herself. Be sure to head over to 3epodcast.com and pick up a free copy of Dr. Berry's gift. Then join us on the next episode.